I'm Pete Tigers. This is the Fly Culture Podcast. Today I'm speaking with someone who spends most of her time fishing the streams that flow off of Exmoor deep in the West Country. They have had such a profound effect on her that she has written a book called Song of the Streams that takes us on a tour of the rivers and trout that means so much to her. I'm pleased to welcome Michelle Werrett to today's episode of the podcast. Michelle, it's wet, windy, miserable. It's typical moorland weather, isn't it, this morning?
Yes, pretty much. Although I hope it's not usually this bad in the summer when I'm up on the moor fishing.
Absolutely. And it's that time now, isn't it? That it's probably a little bit early to start thinking about the coming season. But I think this, personally speaking, has been one of the longest spells of not being able to fish due to water heights. And I'm sure many people listening,
Yes.
it's been very, very difficult, hasn't it? Have you found that a frustrating time personally as well?
Well, I have, because I would love to do a bit of grayling fishing, but the rivers have been completely unfishable ever since the end of the trout and salmon season, really. And also I'd like to get on the rivers. We usually do red surveys at this time of year, looking for where the salmon have been coming up and spawning, but you can't see a thing. Having said that, although I can't get near the river to see, it is giving the fish a good opportunity to come up. So hopefully they're there.
Fingers crossed. And where is it? You mentioned grayling there. I'm guessing I probably can guess the river that you like to fish for grayling, but where do you like for listeners to head to go catch a grayling or two?
Well, the X is really good. All the way from the junction with the Barl down, I suppose. And there are lots of patches. You never know where they're going to crop up, and you might fish for a long way and not find any, and then all of a sudden there's a shoal there and you've got lots all in one spot.
And you do really get the sense that they're quite nomadic, because I used to work over on the X there a number of years ago with Nick. And I remember for spells that we didn't touch a grayling, and then all of a sudden we would find them. And it is slightly different in the West Country, isn't it? That although that we have them, they're on in dramatic, huge numbers, are they?
No, well, as I understand it, they're not native. I think they were introduced to the river in the 19th century. But they seem to have settled in really well. And although people, I think, initially worried that they would compete with trout for habitat and food and resources, they seem to live alongside them quite well, quite happily. And I found both in the same pool.
Wonderful. It's a slightly, my home river, the Tor, is slightly different. I think that the X does run that little bit clearer, doesn't it? And we don't have the grayling. I found proof that they've existed in the Tor a number of years ago, but subsequently
Really?
I haven't got any closer, and the people I spoke to weren't as interested in helping as I would have hoped as well. So I'll keep pushing that one. But the X seems a different river to me, comparable to, let's look at the other big rivers, the Tor, the Tamar, the Torridge. It to me has always, and I'd love to know your thoughts, has always felt more akin to a Welsh river than a West Country river. What do you think about that as a comment?
Well, I really don't know, because I don't know what Welsh rivers are like. But the X is, of course, it has its beginning on Exmoor, and it's a fast moorland stream to start with, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes to the coast. But it still keeps, I think, a lot of that moorland quality. It's very much a freestone, fast tumbling river. And although it changes throughout its length, but certainly there are good spots for grayling, and I think trout all the way through, and occasionally salmon.
And so does that mean that you like to fish for obviously trout, and we'll come on to that when we talk to talk about the book. But grayling, of course, you've just mentioned, and a salmon on your radar. Is that a fish that you like to try and make a cast or two to?
Well, I do. I love to, but of course they aren't there a lot of the time, and a lot of the time, the there's no point fishing for them. But occasionally, when conditions are right, then yes, it's really fun. But they're more of a rarity than the trout are there all the time. So that's my sort of daily fishing.
And that sounds very, very civilized in itself as well. So we've talked about that we're thinking about the season and the start of the season. Are you sort of formulating a plan? Are you thinking where you might want to head on open day?
Well, the X system opens in the middle of March, but very often the rivers don't warm up for some weeks after that. Depends on what the weather's like, of course. But I usually start with the Hadio, which seems to warm up a bit earlier than the rest of the X system. The Hadio, of course, comes out of Wimbleball Reservoir, and so the depths and probably the temperature, I should imagine as well, is sort of influenced by that.
Yeah, that's a stream that's on my list, I have to say, and I've read about it in Mike Weaver's book a number of years ago, and I think you're exactly right that the temperature and certainly here, and I'd love to know your thoughts on early season on the X, for example, because the tour, for me at least now, I've almost stopped fishing in March and April. Possibly April when the Granham start hatching, I'll show a little bit more interest. But if I'm going to fish for trout, like you said, I'll head up the system a little bit further as well. I think I've got a little bit more of a chance there. But where you're fishing on the X, does it come alive early on, or is it because you head to the Hadio because there's not much going on from a hatch point of view on the X?
Yes, the X is later, certainly much later. The Hadio is smaller, perhaps that helps it warm up more quickly. I don't know whether coming out of Wimbleball Reservoir affects the temperature of it. As I said, it might, but certainly it affects the depth. And so, if the X is in spate, very often the Hadio is fishable.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go and have a look at it at some stage. It's been too long, so I need to do something about that. So, is there a river? You've mentioned the Ex, you mentioned the Hadio, and you very briefly touched on the Barle as well. But is there a place that's incredibly special to you, somewhere that you would call your home water? If you've got a day, if you've got an hour, if you've got half a day, that's probably the place that you think, yeah, I'm going to head there now.
Well, there are so many places, Pete, so many places that I really love. If I only have an hour, it's got to be the X or maybe the Hadio, but somewhere close to home, because I'm here, I'm working most of the day, and then, the afternoon wears on, and I think I can't stay here any longer, and I'm off to the river. Well, that's going to be the X, which is only 10 minutes away, less than that. And so if I've only got a short time, that's where I'll go. And often I think, well, I'll just go for an hour. I haven't got very long. I'll just go for an hour. And then before I know it, I think there's something wrong with my eyes, and I'm peering harder and harder to see the fly. And then I realise that it's getting dark.
That's a lovely way to look at it. And it is what it means to us, isn't it? That time, that hour probably is never an hour, is it?
No, it is. It really isn't. Time has a different dimension on a river, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you're 10 minutes away from the river, which sounds perfect. What sort of angler would you call yourself? Are you somebody who likes to fish alone? Are you somebody who enjoys company, or all of the above?
Well, all of the above generally. I do occasionally enjoy going with someone else, but I have to say most of the time I'm on my own. I'm very happy with the river. And there's so much life there and so much going on. It's fascinating, and I think if I'm with someone else, I probably don't notice as much or don't fish as well because my attention is distracted by another person. Whereas if it's just me, I'm more deeply immersed in the river, I think.
I'm pleased you've said that because I've often said on here that I never fish as well. I miss far too many fish when I'm fishing with friends. Exactly as you say, you fish a whole lot better because you are so deeply focused on what is unfolding in front of you. How do you like to fish then? Is it dry fly? Is it nymph or whatever is appropriate?
Well, there are times when I might try a nymph or whatever, particularly if it's a grayling that I'm after, then obviously I will use nymphs. And there are some places where nymphs seem to be the best way to fish, but by and large, dry fly most of the time. It's that's how I like to fish and how I enjoy fishing like that best. And I may be better at it because I do it more often. But so I don't know.
And I think some of those I've caught grayling in the past. Certainly, when they've come back into season in the summer, they'll rise as well, like some of those chalkstream grayling,
Yes,
won't they?
yes, they will.
Yeah, yeah, lovely, lovely, lovely fish, and yeah, I'm sort of already in my mind picturing some of those sections of the Exe and Bowl that I know pretty well and thinking of those fish. So thank you for that on such a miserable morning as well. So have you always fished, Michelle?
No, I've. How long have I been fishing? I can't remember exactly, but not forever. 6 or 7 years, or 8 years, or something like that. But I've become, yeah, it's sort of taken over my life now, and I've become quite passionate about it, and I do it all the time, or I would if the rivers were at all fishable.
So what made you take it up? How did you get into fly fishing?
Well, as I said, I didn't used to fish. I used to ride and things like that. But about 6, 7, 8 years ago, whenever it was, I had breast cancer. And as part of the recovery from that, I came across this wonderful charity called Southwest Fishing for Life. And that was how I learnt to fish. And they were just amazing. And the coaches are fantastic and so patient. I was cack-handed and totally hopeless, but they stuck with it, and they eventually managed to teach me to catch a fish, which was totally amazing.
That's wonderful, and I hope you're doing okay.
I'm
And
fine now, thank you.
good.
Yes, I'm fine.
Good, good. And I remember those when it started. I think was it Wimberpool? They took people up to
Yes,
Wimberpool, wasn't it?
that's right. Yes,
And that's a fishery in itself that's just going great guns. Do you ever head up to Wimberpool at all?
yes, I do. Especially with the Southwest Fishing for Life team, and I go and help now. I'm a level 1 coach, and go and help the girls when, and especially if there are new beginners, help them to get going. And we do that once a month at Wimbleball. And there are other venues all over the southwest, um, and all over the south of England, I think.
That's fantastic. And I would think as a result of that, some wonderful friendships have been formed as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes, certainly. And as I say, I do occasionally fish with other people, and it's almost always it'll be those people from there.
I think that's a wonderful story. So you started on Wimberpool, And of course, your background, because we're going to learn about that when we talk about your book as well. I would see as a river angler, was it difficult for you making that step from still water into river fishing?
Well, I think it was certainly easier to learn to start on still waters. You've got so much more space, haven't you, to learn to cast without getting hung up in bushes. But the rivers very much were, I was drawn to the rivers. It was a great attraction and there was a great incentive there to learn to fish in in those in rivers, because I think it's because it's a wild environment, and I've always loved being within natural places, natural wild environments, and to be able to catch a wild fish is a really special thing.
Do you remember that first one?
Yes, I do. I remember lots of fish, lots and lots of fish, but the wild ones are just to feel that fish through a fine line from my fingers into that river, and there's a live wild creature on the end of that line. Is so special. It's just magical.
And that's one of the wonderful things, isn't it? That we're this part of the world, and I know there's many around the UK and around across the world as well, that we're lucky that we have a trout rich environment here, don't we?
Yes, very much. Yes, we are. There are so many rivers, and they're all accessible. I mean, by that I mean it's not expensive to buy tickets to fish rivers, and lots of places. More than I've been able to get round yet.
It looks like you've done pretty well so far, judging by the book. But and that you've got great clubs like the is it the Barl Angling Club? Is it the Barl or
There's
the?
the Dulverton Angling
That's it. Yeah.
Association is that's really great. And it's not expensive. I think it's something like £35 a year, and anyone can join. It's worth the £35 if you only came for a day, and lots of water available.
Yeah, there's a wonderful mix there, isn't there, to enjoy. And again, I've sort of taken people along those sorts of beats, and £35, like you say, is amazing value, and such a wide variety of fishing as well to enjoy. So, yeah, if
Yes,
listeners are thinking about that, that's the price of, well, it's not even a bit of a day ticket for a stillwater fishing, and you're going to fish some beautiful, beautiful scenery for beautiful fish, plus the added bonus of that system of some grayling as well. So we're getting a sense of you as a person, as an angler. Is tying flies important to you? Is that something you've got into as well as you've embarked on your fly fishing career?
yes, I do enjoy tying flies, and it's there's a lot of sort of magic in it, isn't there? Binding together all these natural ingredients. I really prefer using natural things, especially ingredients that I can find, like sheep's wool and feather and deer hair off the barbed wire, that sort of thing. Um, and I like that satisfying circularity of using things from this natural environment to then catch fish from the same environment, and it ties the whole thing together.
And that's beautifully put, and a lovely idea as well, that you're actually finding the materials rather than buying the latest, greatest new material. You're finding, because these patterns still work, don't they, just as well as they've always done.
Yes, yes, I love that, and I really enjoy finding old patterns and reading old books about fishing long ago. That's really inspiring.
And there's a few from Devon as well, isn't there? The Tups, of course, from
Yes,
RS Austin, from Tiverton,
that's right.
which is a wonderful. I think we've got the Devon Dumpling as well. Is another fly. There's a few, isn't there, that are going to work just as well as they've always worked.
They certainly do, yes.
Yeah. So do you sort of sit and tie now? Are you sort of preparing your fly box for the new season, or do you have that sort of where you want it right now?
No, it's never where it's. I never have enough flies, or I never. I'm always planning what I'm going to make next, and I've got lots and lots of things that need to be made, and yes, I just have to find time to make them.
Yes, that's part of the fun, I think, as well, is getting that ready. And I'm hoping at some stage I get to go grayling fishing. I've got to sort some nymphs out, which I've not done, but heaven knows when that's going to happen. But that's part of the fun of it, sitting down, sorting out a fly box, getting that ready. And we sort of picture in our minds, don't we, those sunny days, rising trout, never the conditions that we're sitting in right now, are they?
That's right. All that anticipation, and so yes, there's a lot of magic in it. The just the plans and the anticipation of the fish you're going to catch,
Absolutely.
and that the hope, I think, that you put into each little fly that you create.
Yeah. And it's wonderful, particularly if you've tied them yourself, that fish comes up and eats it. That's a special moment, isn't it?
Yes, isn't it amazing that something I've tied together from scraps of bits and pieces I've found could fool a fish into thinking it's an insect, a fish whose life depends on identifying insects. So, yeah, it's a compliment if one rises to something I've made.
Well, that gives us a clue that you must be a pretty fine fly tyer.
Well, it works occasionally.
Wonderful. So I associate, obviously, because of the books and what you've said about, not fishing the rivers of Wales makes me think that you're perfectly content with where you're fishing. Um, and so Exmoor is a place. Is Dartmoor sort of on your radar as well?
I haven't fished Dartmoor much, um, not very much. I have fished the lower Avon and the Dart, but Dartmoor is certainly a place I'm planning to fish more. I would love to explore all the little moorland streams up there. Yes, that's definitely something I want to do. I love wild places, as I said, and the wilder the better.
Yeah.
So Dartmoor would suit me.
I think you'll be spoilt there, and I think you'll enjoy that immensely. But tell me, in the book, it was fascinating, and I often ask people if they like to sit down, have lunch with a friend, and take some time. But I certainly noticed that you like to sit down, and chocolate seems to be the snack of choice for you as a fly angler. Yeah.
I can't go anywhere without taking chocolate, yes. It's usually dark salted chocolate. And yes, sitting down and eating a square of chocolate seems to somehow refocus, recalibrate my brain, and then I get going again. But yes, I work better on chocolate, definitely.
And I noticed that you said, and we'll be coming on to the book shortly, but you did say that you like to sit down and have a square and then wait for a bit. Does that, you said to refocus as well, do you do that as you enter a pool, as you're sort of starting to read the water, or you've seen a fish rise to see if, do you use it for that point of view as well, that you can take in what's happening if you get to a particularly special piece of water?
Well, yes, I think I do. It's I can, or I have in the past tended to be overexcited, you see, and then too hasty. And it works much better if I slow down, eat a piece of chocolate, look at the water, look at the insects, and just absorb the place a bit and see what's happening before I start.
I guess the fish aren't going to go anywhere, are they?
Well, that's right. And in fact, they're coming back because they might have heard you or noticed movement as you come into a pool. And so if you just stop for a little while, they relax and perhaps that initial um, tendency to hide or to be super alert can they just have time to relax and come back.
I think that's a good policy. And we talk a lot on here about taking a little bit of time, seeing what's happening, watching what's happening, and that can pay dividends and that might catch you a fish or even perhaps two. And those fish, as you say, if I use Dartmoor, which I think is a similar sort of case, that those fish are from the school of hard knocks and they're incredibly spooky, yet if food comes, they're not going to hang around, are they? They're going to eat it. But if they haven't, I've seen fish travel a long way to eat a fly, yet I've seen them spooked by me just walking along the river sometimes as well. It's that moment of waiting a little bit longer definitely works, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. They're very wild, very spooky. And when the streams are small and shallow, they can see you moving. If you're anywhere within sight of the water, they'll be gone. So you've got to really creep up to the edge of the bank very, very quietly. And on sometimes, on my knees, I'm just crawling through the bracken.
And I think that's part of the fun of it, isn't it? And I'm visualizing places I like to fish on Dartmoor where you're speaking about that. And I remember a wonderful case that took somebody fishing on Cherry Brook, I think it was, and we'd sat on this fish for ages. And then somebody walked down the edge of the river, another fisherman, and
Oh, no.
we could just watch the fish dart away. And
no.
he said, "Are you catching any?" And my polite response was, "Yes, up until a few moments ago." And it does show how spooky those fish are. And I often think, they're not sizable fish, are they? But if there are, and I know Dartmoor's thrown out some nice fish for people this year as well, and people I've had on the podcast, which has been great. But generally, I often think if those fish were pound, £2, £3, they'd probably be some of the most aggressive, strong fish I'd ever catch.
Oh, definitely. They definitely fight above their weight. So for me, as I said, size is not my priority with fish. I like catching fish that are wild, and because they are so spooky and so crafty and so clever. It's more of a thing when you do catch one. But occasionally I will go somewhere, as we said, like Wimbleball, and it's nice to feel a bigger fish bending the rod, and it's nice to have something to take home for supper, because I don't usually kill wild fish.
No, and kudos to Harry Chance as well for that fish that you had off of Dartmoor. And that brings on to we're about to start on the book, but it was interesting what you said about it, because I know I was reading recently, and you said you took a fish from the river, which I have no issues with whatsoever, and you thought long and hard about it, and that is still part of our pastime, although we're catch and release anglers as a whole. Taking one of these little trout every now and again to eat and celebrate, I don't have a problem with. Did you sort of, in the book, did you sort of think about that before you actually did it a great deal, or is it just such a rare event for you as well?
Well, it is a rare event, and I think it has to be these days, because fish numbers have diminished, and if every angler killed every fish they caught, it would have an impact. Certainly, it would have an impact on the fish in the stream. Although I don't think it's the most significant impact. I think the numbers are more determined by the food that's available for them, and we've lost so many insects, haven't we? But nevertheless, I don't want to compound the problem by killing fish. So I hardly ever do that, but just occasionally, just to taste one, it somehow gives you a deeper connection to the stream, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to the book. And Song of the Streams feels like it is written with great affection for those rivers. I guess that would be a fair comment.
Oh yes, certainly. Yes, I love them. Those little moorland streams they're just such beautiful places to spend a day, even before you start catching fish. even if you don't catch one.
And I was amazed, having read it, how many streams off of Exmoor there actually are, or little, I guess, little tributaries. And there seems so many that I was astounded how many that you've written about.
Well, there are a lot. Some of them are very tiny, though, and not very significant. And some of them actually change their name. So it might be different rivers, different streams are known by different names as you go down. But they're all beautiful. Like Weir water becomes Weir water, and then chalk water join, and they become Ore water, and then that eventually becomes the East Lynn.
So the main three rivers, I'm guessing, off of Dartmoor would be the Barle, the Exe, and the Lynn.
From Exmoor,
Yeah.
the yes, the Barle and the Exe, which join, of course, and then also if you go slightly further southwest, you have the Bray and the Mole, and they go into the Tor, as you know. And then there are the Lynn with lots of tributaries, lots and lots of tiny tributaries that go into the Lynn. And there's the Heddon, which doesn't go into any other river, and it's not very long. It's just a short river that comes off the moor and goes straight into the sea on the north coast.
Our very first picture of the very first edition of the magazine had a friend of mine, Luke, looking down the River Heddon there. That's the very first picture that you'll see, because it just was on the cusp, I think, of opening up. It was taken by Malcolm Anderson, and it's a beautiful shot. And it is a river, and we've subsequently, I think Dan Osmond has written about it as well for us, that you literally have the sea in the background, don't you? That you're fishing up and catching trout just a short distance from the sea.
Absolutely. You can start fishing on the beach. It's a tricky stream, though, very, very tricky. And there are lots of parts of it are so overgrown, it's almost impossible to fish. But in and out, there are little pools where you can get a fly onto the water.
Yeah, it sounds lovely. I'm already planning lots. I think always one of the problems for me is that the Lynn, for me, is such a long distance to get to that I can get to the Dartmoor so much more quickly. But sometimes you've got to make a little bit of effort to get to these special places. So I wondered, what was the catalyst for you to undertake this book? What caused you to say, I want to follow this route? I want to talk about these streams. I want to talk about this passion that's become such a large part of my life now. What was the catalyst for this?
Well, I came across Claude Wade's book, Exmoor Streams, and it wasn't the first time I'd read it, but I'd read it when I was very young and I was just interested in Exmoor. But now, as a sort of newish fisherman, I wanted to learn about fishing on Exmoor and wanted to learn about Exmoor streams from an angling perspective. And reading it and understanding fishing a bit, I suddenly realised then how very different the streams are from the way that he describes them. They don't appear to be. The landscape hasn't changed. And, if you're looking at a stream that is above any agricultural land, above houses and towns, there's no runoff, no human influence you would imagine into that water. It's above any sewage outlets, above any possible runoff from agricultural fields or roads or anything. And yet the numbers of fish are not the same as they were when Claude Wade was writing about this. And his memories are going back into Victorian times. And it's not just him. I've read other books as well. A.G. Bradley and Thornton and lots of different writers from that time. So confirming his stories about the numbers of fish. Well, I would be delighted if I went up one of these streams and had half a dozen fish in a day. But he's catching several dozen, and quite regularly over 100. And he talks about someone once catching 315 in a day. Now, that was a record, but even so, you couldn't do it today. You couldn't possibly. And I know I'm not a brilliant fisherman, but I've taken friends who I think would be, and they really couldn't do it either.
Yeah, it is completely different now, isn't it? It does seem to be from what you were saying, I was thinking about that 100 fish day that I read about that recently in the book. And yeah, it does seem to be a different story. So was part of it wanting to retrace some of Wade's footsteps, or was it a case or a combination that you got a map out and looked at all these blue lines that were running off of Exmoor and you wanted to try and explore them?
Well, they weren't streams that I'd never been to before, because I'd walked or ridden over them all my life, I suppose. I sort of knew the streams a bit, but I hadn't fished many of them. I hadn't fished them at all before. So there was that. And it was as if although I knew the moor, fishing the streams gave me a different sort of relationship with the moor. So it was coming to a familiar place, but in a new way. And that was fascinating. That was really lovely, to develop a more intimate relationship with these streams. But also I was really concerned to read about how very abundant the fish used to be. And I can remember how many insects there used to be and how many birds there used to be. I remember what the dawn chorus sounded like when I was little, and it never sounds like that now. And so there is a great loss I think, to all of nature, all around us, but particularly the wildlife that's underwater, we don't notice so much. And until I fished, I would not have noticed how many fish were in a stream. I wouldn't know. You don't see them very often, do you? And it's almost another world under the surface of the water. So fishing gave me a different connection with that part of the land, and a different appreciation that even though it looks pristine, there are still problems.
Yeah. As someone who's written numerous articles, did you have to look differently at the process of each chapter, of writing each chapter, or did you look at each chapter as an article in its own right? I guess I'm talking about long form writing and writing a lot more. Did you have to approach it differently than to a magazine article, for example?
Well, in some ways, I think many of the chapters could stand alone as an article or as a sort of story, and a few of them link as sort of part A and part B of the same story. But most of the chapters could be read in almost any order as stories in their own right. But it's writing for myself was different from writing for a magazine, because magazines always have some requirement, some sort of house style, if you like, or some format that they hope their writers will sort of fit into. And so I'm writing with that particular readership, that publication in mind. But when I was writing the book, I was writing only purely for myself, and I didn't think about who was going to read it, or what sort of form it had to take, or how long it should be. And I always start writing where I'm actually doing whatever I'm writing about. So I'm there fishing, and I might, if I'm lucky enough to catch a fish, I might just sit down there and then and write it down. If I try to remember it until I come home, it's never as fresh, and it loses a lot of the life. I suppose, like drawing a picture. If I was an artist, I would want to sit and draw or paint in front of the landscape I was trying to capture, rather than try to keep it all in my head until I got home. I know it wouldn't work like that. My memory is just not sharp enough. So I start off everything with a pencil and a notebook, and then later on, when I get home, I can put it into the computer, and then that's when I start editing it electronically, and then I'll fiddle with it and somehow bash it into shape to make it into a chapter.
That's a really nice insight. And it struck me that you thought deeply about every single sentence that you wrote, and they're beautifully structured, beautifully put together. And there's a lot of thought gone into this. Does that mean that it took a long time for you to write?
Well, thank you. I'm glad. I'm so glad that you like that aspect of it, and it is important to me that it sort of sounds nice, that words flow flow nicely. I suppose it did. Yes, it would take a while. Perhaps I would change this and that, but I think the best bits, the hardest bits to write, are perhaps the less interesting bits, the bits where I've done a lot of research and found out a lot of facts and that sort of thing. And sometimes I find it hard to make that sound interesting or really engaging. The bits where I'm experiencing something that's really inspiring, and I just sit down and it just comes out the end of the pencil. That's not hard to write at all.
And it's those good days, isn't it, that are easy. And I remember even going back even further than when we ran the online magazine, or even if I wrote for that my wife Emma I would throw it across for her to have a look at. And she would know how good the day was. Or if I was taking people fishing, she would know how good the day had been by the style of writing. And I guess these wonderful little streams, like you say, lend themselves really, really well to write about, particularly if you've had a good day on them too.
Yes, for me, they are very inspiring places, and they're just such lovely places to spend the day. So, yes, I don't find it hard to write about that at all.
And do you have a writing regime, or is it a loose process for you then, if it is more by feel or that day that's happened? Do you sit down and say to yourself, I'm going to write 500 words, or you just let it flow as and when it flows?
I do rather. Yes, I probably ought to be more organised than I am but I do, because I have to fit in so many bits of my life, so many different elements, that it just has to fit in as and when. I don't have a strict regime of sitting down at a certain time of day or anything like that. And of course, with the fishing, we're very much dependent on the state of the river. So if the river isn't fishable, I'm not fishing, and if I'm not fishing, I'm not writing about that day. I'm probably editing something I wrote about another day. So even my writing is influenced by the state of the water, very much.
Yeah. And that's really the creative process, isn't it? That it is when the old hackneyed term, when inspiration strikes, and you can feel, can't you, as a writer, that if something's wanting to get out, you have to get it out, don't you?
Yes, very much. And that's when good writing happens, I think, when you've got all these ideas and words inside that have to come out onto the paper, and they sort of bubble out through your pencil. But if the river is in perfect order, and especially when it hasn't been for weeks and weeks, and then suddenly it's looking really fishy, that has a big impact on my writing regime, because I'm off and I go fishing instead.
Tell me, was there a stream, you don't have to name it, But was there a stream that really got under your skin that you visited, had a memorable time there, or it was just so beautiful, and perhaps you didn't even catch a fish, but you were there and you felt, oh, this is an amazing place. Was there one in particular for you?
Yes, I think that, yes, I do. I have felt that, but perhaps about more than one. Chalkwater, particularly, was a very special place. A very, very beautiful stream and a very magical place to be. But also, a lot of those little moorland streams, I think, just a moorland environment, I've always felt drawn to and always enjoyed being in a moorland environment. And when it's, as I said before, when I'm fishing it, I'm there somehow in a new way, in a different, and have a different relationship with it.
Lovely. Did you learn anything about yourself through this process of writing the book?
Oh, I don't know. That's an interesting question, and I haven't considered. I'm sure I've learned lots and lots of things. I've learned a lot about fishing, and about writing as well, of course. But I don't really know the answer to that.
That's fine. That's fine. I was just fascinated to know, going from shorter form to longer form, if it had impacted your writing in any way, shape, or form. Has it made you more of a confident writer? Has it made you look at how you structure magazine articles differently? That's what I was kind of, I guess, trying to get a sense of.
Yes. Well, it is a different process, isn't it, writing a book? And it's sometimes I wonder about the form and the sort of narrative arc running through the whole book, and whether that works as well in a long piece of work like a book as it does in an article. And perhaps that's why a lot of my chapters are stories in their own right. Maybe it's more, in some ways it's more a collection of stories than one long piece.
Wonderful.
I don't know, but I hope they have some sort of cohesion anyway.
Absolutely, they do. And as you said, that they work, I found I read a chapter and then dip back in again, and then you get a sense of, that river in an in an individual sense of, right, you fished here, the Chalkwater, for example, and then you're heading somewhere else. And I'm thinking, oh, I wonder if I know this one or I know that one, and that's been really fun to dip in and out of. And so for me, it's worked beautifully that although I want to sit there and read a lot of it in one go, I'm sort of saving bits back, which I'm kind of looking forward to the next one as well from that point of view. So it's been very enjoyable from that point of view. But, we've talked about the process of the writing of Song of the Streams. I wondered, Michelle, would you be so kind to read us a little bit? Because I'm sure listeners would really like to get a sense of the book and the stuff that we've talked about. So do you have something that you could read for us, please?
All right. Thank you. I This is a little piece about the River Mole. Further along the river, far upstream, a pool lies under the left bank. Not large, but quite deep, where the river has curled itself into a hollow of the bank and hidden below a cluster of long hazel stems bowing overhead, some standing erect, some reaching more than halfway across its course, and some almost skimming the water. From a fern-fringed alcove enclosed within the arch of stems, the rippling rings of a rise dilated across the pool. On the opposite side, the river had pared away the edge of the grass field to leave a vertical earth face just a few feet high. I bent almost double to keep my head below its horizon as I crept as close as I dared and crouched in its cover. For a few minutes I was still, hoping any perceived movement would be forgotten, letting my pulse steady, feeling the coolness of the water, listening to the chanting current, smelling the soft summer cord braided from green scents of herbs and grasses on the warm air. The fish rose again. There was very little space between the surface of the water and the lowest hazel bough. My cast would have to be flat and accurate. If it splashed the water or caught in the bush, all would be lost. I doubted I could do it. What insects the fish was taking were too far away to be seen, so I watched those around me, hoping to imitate what I was unable to name, and decided to use a very small beige deer hair sedge. After tying one onto a fine tippet, I looked again at the narrow slot of space I must cast into and took a deep breath. It was tight. I have no recollection of how I made that cast, having mentally closed my eyes to avoid seeing the inevitable disaster. But to my amazement, it worked. My fly sailed under the low hazel bough to land softly in the middle of the pool. There was a quick splip of a rise, and I flipped the rod tip sideways into firm contact with a solid and energetic fish. The trout swirled around the pool as swallows swirled looping and dipping over the meadow, and when he came to my net, he was as glorious and bright and vibrant as the cornflower blue summer day.
Absolutely beautiful. And for listeners, now you have got a sense of Michelle's wonderful writing. And that, to me, displays beautifully how you have laboured and thought about every single sentence. I've got to put my hands up and say I've shut my eyes sometimes as the line's gone out as well and made a cast and have been equally as surprised when it's landed there. So congratulations on the fish. Congratulations
Thank you.
on a beautiful, I've not got onto that one yet as well. So, and I'm going to talk to you off mic because I bet I know where that is as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Even better then, even better. But that was wonderful. So for listeners, yes, you're getting a sense, beautifully crafted, beautifully structured, and beautifully put together. And Michelle, the lovely thing as well is by, admission as well, shutting your eyes and making that cast. You're like all of us, we're all fly anglers, aren't we? We're not angling superstars or anything along those sorts of lines. We're going out, we're going to a river that we love, we're spotting a fish, hoping that it will get our fly to it. And sometimes, just sometimes, it all comes together, doesn't it? Which I love and immensely. So thank you for reading that. We've talked about, as we move on, we're coming up an hour of talking now. And you talked about Wales and say, had you not fished there? Does that mean that it's really hard to get you away from those streams of Exmoor? Have you travelled with a fly rod, or is there somewhere that you would love to cast the dry fly to a trout or something else?
Oh, I have a little. I have a little bit. I've enjoyed fishing in Dorset, and I've been to some very different rivers, chalk streams, which are so completely different, aren't they, from our freestone Exmoor rivers, like the Piddle, which was wonderful, wonderful, and the Froom, which is mostly chalk, but not entirely. And there are lots of places I would love to go. I really would, and especially wild places like I'd love to go to the sort of highlands and islands of Scotland and some of those amazing sounding lochs and little high streams I've only read about, but I'd love to go places like that.
They sound very, very good choices to me. Now, this is becoming almost a dreaded question for my podcast guests that we have on Spotify, the Fly Culture music road trip list. Would you be so kind to choose me a piece of music to go on our playlist, please?
A piece of music? That is a hard thing, and I hadn't thought about it before. I love all kinds of music, especially I mostly listen to classical music, jazz occasionally, but I cannot think of one particular piece. I can't. I don't. I can't think of one piece. I'll have to come back to you with that.
That's not a problem in the slightest. As I said, it's the dreaded one that we sort of throw into the mix just to add some spice to things. But it's been absolutely wonderful talking with you. I would urge people to seek out Song of the Streams. Michelle, where can people find a copy? Where can they connect with you on social media? How can they find you? And what are your details?
Well, they can find me if I'm on Instagram and Twitter, or X as they call it these days, and Facebook. But I mostly use Instagram probably more than anything else. If you just Google my name, you'll find that. Also, I have an occasional blog on my website, which is just Michelle Werrett Rural Writing. And the book was published by the Medlar Press, and people can get a copy if they would like one from the Medlar Press directly. That's the best way to buy it. It isn't in very many shops, but the Medlar Press are sending out copies quite promptly when they get orders.
That's fantastic. And as we always try and do with the magazine, with the podcast, is support creative people and press companies like Medlar as well, who have delivered some wonderful books over the years as well. So, search out Medlar Press and you'll be able to find a copy of Song of the Streams there. Michelle, it's been wonderful to be able to talk with you and to get a sense of you as a fly angler. And of course, for me, it's been wonderful to get a sense of you as a writer as well. It's been wonderful to listen to you read from the book as well. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today and being a guest on the podcast today. It's been wonderful to catch up.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you so much.
So everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. As always, these are free to download. There's a date for your diaries if you've not already seen it on our social media handles. On the 25th of January from 6 p.m. till 8 p.m, we will be at Orvis in Stockbridge. We'll be putting on some food, some drinks, and we're going to try something, or I'm going to try something, and record a live podcast. We're going to have a panel of guests. We're going to ask questions from the audience as well. So that's going to be great fun. I'm going to go after we finish this to make sure all of the equipment that I put together, thank you, Ben Blood, for the microphones as well, to see if this all works and if we can pull this one off. But I'm very, very much looking forward to that. If this one works, we'll be doing some more throughout the year as well. So it would be wonderful to see you at Stockbridge. It sounds as though there's going to be a big crowd already, but we've got plenty of room for you, so we hope to see you there. But as always, thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.